Right, so for this second part of the little interview, we're going to perhaps tackle something a little bit more
Okay.
high level, and the idea of let's throw out the idea: are there atheists in foxholes?
Yes, I would say yes, there are. There aren't maybe as many. Often when I would suggest when you're cowering in the bottom of a foxhole, there's a heavy artillery barrage coming in. You have to do something. Most men will pray, please don't let the shell hit me. They won't say let it hit the guy in the next trench, but they have to do something, and often just a praying, and that's really what they mean by atheist in a foxhole. Is that yes? So people say don't let it hit me. They also have to say, well, why did it hit the hole next to me? Or why did I survive? Why did that mortar shell come into my trench, kill the guy next to me, and I came out without a scratch? They ask that question. And as a padre, you say, I have absolutely no idea. But the other, you would say, I would suggest they'd say, well, you could say it wasn't your time if you wanted, if you're not religious. You could say it's God's plan. People say, well, why does God do that? God, it seems pretty capricious. We don't know, and no clergy would, if they're of any sort, would say, no, we know God's plan. And perhaps, and it's going back to before I was actually ordained, in Canada you have to do a hospital chaplaincy as part of your training, it primarily to make you deal with death. And there was a fellow in the hospital I trained in who had gone in, he had diabetes, he was a cantankerous old man, he did not get along with women, misogynist might be a good way to describe him. Of course, hospital staff are almost all women, the nurses and so on in those days, so which that didn't work out really well. He had a family somewhere, but he'd lost contact with them. But anyways, he'd watched his foot rot off in a cheap motel room from diabetes. So he went in and they removed his foot, and they were just about to discharge him, and they discovered he had lung cancer. Oh. And basically 3 weeks later he died. Why was he there? People say, why, it was bad enough he had lost his foot. Why would, I don't know. I say perhaps it was for the nurses to learn you have to deal with difficult people. Maybe it's for me to deal about death because I got called to do his first funeral. It's the first funeral I ever did. And a colleague came along with me, and we honestly didn't expect anybody to come to the funeral. And interestingly, 2 women showed up. For a fellow that didn't like women, to have two women show up. One owned the motel, and the other was the woman from the restaurant across the road that sent him over food periodically. 2 women, and I helped carry him into, it's basically a pauper's grave in the cemetery. The social services paid for the funeral, but there was no headstone or anything. But was it for me to learn about death? I don't know. And it could be that way with troops. Why did such and such happen? Why did someone suddenly seem to be surviving? And one of the chaplains, he's not in there, he's in later in the war, he was killed on May 4th, 1945.
Yeah, well, that's...
Yeah, why did this happen?
Yeah, I mean, with the no atheists in foxholes concept, it is also very common that men, I'm assuming women as well, when they're dying, but particularly men, they call out for their mother. That you see it in the war movies, and you seem to.
It's true.
And people who've come back and who actually came through, when they are have their friends discuss what was happening when they were nearly dying, and they would say you were calling out for your mum. They don't remember they're doing it. They don't remember that it was I. Yeah. I've known other people did that. I didn't know I did that. So I think that's more of an inbuilt. We're not making that decision. No. That's just a mother
has always comforted us.
So I don't know that it's a decision. So I'm going to put it out as an atheist that the praying in foxholes is more of a desperation. You in some cases. And you're in this life and death struggle, and you're trying to put a placeholder on something that you don't understand. And I was on Twitter this morning. There was an interesting meme, and it was a person looking up at the universe, and it was God isn't big enough for my universe. You know, the universe is just huge. I mean, billions of galaxies and billions of systems, and we're one little planet in one huge, great cosmos that we only understand a tiny part of, and yet this supreme being has decided that our tiny planet, one of millions and billions and billions, is the one he's interested in, and you know, it is fascinating. And I remember telling you, I've told this story before, and I'll let you talk. That I was contacted by an author a few years ago who was going to be writing. He was a priest somewhere in the States, writing a book, and he wrote to me and he emailed me and he said, "I understand you've met lots of veterans and accounts, things like that, this, that, and the other. And he said, have you come across men who gained their faith during World War II?" And I said, yes, I definitely have. There's the famous story of David Silver, who was an infantryman in the 1st Division, Omaha Beach, who down there behind his hedgehog obstacle said, if you let me get through this, I will devote my life to you. Became a priest. I think he was a military chaplain for a long time. And eventually had this incredible moment where 50 years or 60 years on, he met Heinz Severloh, the machine gunner from Widerstand in 62, and they met on the beach, and whoever it was, CBS did a big piece about it. And he was one of those examples who'd done that. And there were quite a few others. And I emailed back and said, yes, I have, and I've got a few stories. I didn't give him the stories, I've got a few. And I said, but I've also got some stories of men who completely lost their faith in World War II. Would you like them as well? And this is over various emails. He said, no, I'm not interested in that. I'm only interested in the ones who found faith. And I said, okay, as a more interesting question, whichever side of the fence you're on, isn't it more interesting to look at the finding of and losing of faith as a much more interesting picture than it is just the one side of the story? And I like to think that although I'm on one side of the fence, I'm completely understanding of those on the other side of the fence, and I might be wrong. And rather than the Pascal's wager idea of things, which is you might as well believe because what you got to lose, I go on the other one by whose name I can't remember right now, who said his wager is go through life believing what you want to believe, in my case, nothing. And if I get to a point and there is God or Mithra or Odin or whatever form there, and I go, oh, whoops, I've got it wrong, sorry, that he or she or it would judge me by the fact, you know what, I haven't murdered people, I've not been a bad person. I didn't believe, and for whatever reason, if you did obviously exist, and you didn't give me the capacity to believe in you, for whatever reason, don't hold that against me. So that's the kind of the idea I have. But and anyway, this thing with this priest writing a book is we ended up not continuing because I said, you don't have to, at least let me send them to you. No, I don't want them. I don't want them in my inbox, he said. And I just thought it was a very narrow-minded view of things. And why would, and he said, I'm writing the book for his congregation, his followers. And I said to him, but if your followers, their faith surely is, if they're secure in their faith, reading a book that has people finding faith and people losing faith is not going to make them suddenly lose their faith overnight. If anything, it's going to make them a richer person and a bit more understanding that one person's life is different to someone else's. And if there is a God, as you believe, and he decided to have the particular ranger I knew who lost his faith to lose his faith, then that's all part of God's plan, isn't it? But anyway, I don't know whether he ever did the book, by the way. I never did find out. Every now and then I periodically search for a book about that. I haven't found it. But
well, I guess ultimately, and sometimes it has to do with an understanding of faith. There's those that have a very, very simplistic faith that God is this bearded old man up in heaven. Mine tends to be a bit more elaborate. We are, to me, the soul, I guess it goes back to the human soul, is energy. We run on energy. Our brains function on electric impulses. Our hearts are electric impulses. And so that's what makes us soul. And a physicist will tell you energy doesn't ever go away.
That's true.
It's there.
Yeah.
And I know at one time I'd asked you about if you'd had any experiences here with people experiencing, for want of a better term, ghosts on the battlefield.
Oh, many occasions, yes.
And that And certainly in northern France and World War I battlefields, there is many reports of people experiencing sort of strange things, souls perhaps wandering on the battlefield for one reason or another. Why, we don't know. That energy hasn't, if you will, transferred. And the energy, another way of describing it in the church is love. In the main Christian denominations, God is love. God is not vengeful. That's very Old Testament. No, Christ has said God is love. So when you experience love, God is there. And just perhaps give you an example. I've now done 2 in the South, Blessings of the Animals. I have Anglican colleagues who say, "What, you think a dog has a soul?" I say, I have no idea if my dogs have a soul. I know they give me love and I love them. And so if they show me love, who am I to say what's in heaven? If God, again, I quote scripture. I don't do that too often. It says, in my Father's mansion there are many rooms for all sorts of people. We use that. That's often used by clergy at a funeral for someone that we don't know if went to church or whatever. We don't know. We can never presume to I speak for the divine, but only in my humanness. That can be wrong. So where you experience love, and then the soldiers, and it's on many of the Commonwealth headstones, greater love hath no man than this, to lay down his life. It's literally on dozens of them. I was in the Benny Strom area earlier this week, and it's on dozens of them. That these men died, you can say on the macro level, they died for their country. Well, no, they didn't really die for their country. When it came down to it, they died for the guys next to them to make sure that they didn't get overrun.
Yeah, it has to be.
It's filial love. It's not some erotic love. It's filial love, brotherly love of each other. That they did not want to see the person they trained with, become friends with, spent leave with. They might have even gone whoring with. I don't know. But they did not want to see them die. They were going to try to.
An amusing story for the viewers. Earl McClung, who was in Easy Company 506, the infamous famous band of brothers. I was talking to him once. He'd had a couple. I'd had a couple. And war films came up. And he said, there's not been a film made yet that shows the love of a man in combat for the man beside him. And then he kind of nudged me and said, I don't mean Brokeback Mountain in khaki, he said. He said the love between men in combat. And he said, I can tell you now, I love the men beside me more than in some ways than I could ever love my wife, a partner, a child, because it's born out of that adversity. And that was, although we laughed, it was a very sort of deep moment for me. But I think touching on what you said there, you said 2 or 3 times there, I don't know. And I think that's what, for whatever reason, I have this, the way my brain functions is that I don't put a temporary placeholder in if my honest answer to something is I don't know. I don't know exactly how the universe began. I believe it's 13.6 billion years and man has been around for 200,000 of those years, and fish and amoeba and blah, 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 and evolution, all that. And but I don't just put a stopgap. Well, I'm not sure yet, so I'm going to just go with this because it sounds plausible.
And ultimately, faith is what, I believe that we have a soul, that when we die, we go to heaven, that we are. And I had someone, a woman just recently was out, she was just visiting my parish or my congregation this past month, who's studying theology, and she said, so you're a universal salvationist. I said, yes and no, because I believe everybody goes to heaven. However, there is a judgment. Even as Christians, there's judgment. People often think, oh, I'm Christian. Jesus said, I'm not, He didn't say you're not going to be judged. He said, I will be the judge. And I've lived a human life, so I know what it's like to be a human. I don't know if Jesus did bad things or not. We like to say he was perfect. He was a little boy at one time. That he had to experience the full human condition. He loved and was loved, however you want to take that. But that he experienced it, so that Christians will be judged by him, who has experienced the thing. It's sort of like having, perhaps using military terms, a judge advocate that's never served in the front lines. To say what's going on. That if they've only been back in the base areas, it'd be quite different than a court-martial judge saying, that served in combat. An example of that might be, and it's a Canadian example, is the 12th SS Divisional Commander Kurt Meyer was tried by the Canadians, and he was found guilty and sentenced to death. The Canadian commanding general, who had the right to commute his sentence, said, well, things happen in war that we can't control. Things happen. And he said, no, I'm not signing his death warrant. He commuted him to life in prison, which didn't turn out to be life in prison, but it didn't turn out to be life in prison.
6-7 years, wasn't it? Then,
ultimately, he was released in 1950.
Don't get me started.
No, but there was this understanding that things happen, that you need, and that Christians believe there's a judge that's going to be more understanding of the human condition. Those that aren't Christian, I don't condemn them. I've interacted and had conversations with people that are, the term is pagan, the non-Christian. I've interacted with Muslims, with Jewish people, all sorts of faith groups. And I mean, there's some people that are Christian, but you actually talk to a pagan, someone that the Druids, or
there's too many labels. It's labeling it. There are 40,000 different denominations of Christianity, and this, that, and the other, and they all.
And so, it's not. I think if you believe in something beyond yourself, that's the big thing. That's agnosticism, I'd say. You believe there's something out there beyond you. I don't believe God is only focused on earth. I don't believe that. I believe if you can, and going all the way back to the Big Bang. Well, what caused the Big Bang? This.
Indeed, yes. Well, again, and I would say at the moment we don't know.
No, and
until we have a better idea, it's perfectly okay to say I don't
know.
But
but ultimately, I like to say to people, I believe in a God that deals with love. That where love is experienced, then there God is. Whether it be in a remembrance of a sacrificial act every Sunday in our communion service, of Christ sacrificing himself for humanity, or picking up a kitten on the road that's going to get hit and moving it off to the side. Those are things, that's love.
Well, that returns it back to the original discussion about the chaplains and their role, and they're there to just be nice and just be understanding and be tolerant and the things I find annoying about some of the established religions are this idea of, because you don't fulfill this particular criteria, therefore you're out. The lay, gay, transgender, this type of thing, and because of whether it's Christianity or the Muslim faith, it's in the Quran, it's in the Bible, it's in whatever it is that this is saying this, and my way of looking at it is, okay, it's the word of God, but did God, if there is a God, give all of what he knew to those people, or did they only ask him certain questions, which they interpreted at a certain time? And that, yes, we've got a much more complex understanding of different genders and aspects of us, that maybe those people then didn't ask the right questions to God, and so they didn't specify the different criteria. But now we're now saying, well, you can't get in because you believe in this. And there's people on Twitter who say, Catholics, it's a pagan cult. You go, okay, that's just over 1 billion people you've just pushed out, because it gets a bit frustrating.
People very much, and using military terms, people always like to think they're better than someone else. There's some that will say, the United States Marine Corps, hoorah, we're better than the Army. And I happened to on a video of a drunk soldier he'd called the police because some people were having problems with him, and he's waiting out front, and he steps close to one of the policemen, and the policeman says, get back, and this guy's drunk, and he doesn't. And so the policeman puts him on the floor, puts him down on the ground, and says, and the fellow says, I'm a soldier. Well, I was in the USMC, you back down, we're better. That sort of thing. Interestingly, in most of the time I found, it may only come out when they're drunk, but people in if you will, the best in the military, the most highly trained, tend to be also, for the most part, the most humble. They don't boast. They know. Of course, they know they're good. If you have to make a big thing about it, then you're insecure. You have doubts, and certainly in going into battle, especially after later on in the war. there was a shortage of troops. I want to make it through. When it starts to be clear the end of the war is coming, people say, like, oh, please, Lord, let me survive this. I want to get home. And then they survive the war and get hit in a car accident on the way back to one of the camps on the coast.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Those things happen a lot.
But this understanding of ultimately something beyond yourself is I think the biggest thing that chaplains deal with, is say there is more than just you. And they would say, well, why was someone able to die, or they terrible wound, but they're very stoic about it. There's in my book Chaplain Hawksworth, who was in the traffic accident. His motorcycle was hit by an armored vehicle, and the accounts say, well, he was very calm. Oh, well, take the other soldiers first. Don't take me. He was very humble, very caring about the others, and yet he was obviously dying at the time. Showing care, and care is another way of describing love. That he so ultimately, if you care more about things than just yourself, and I think there are people that live very lonely lives. And then for some reason they have an intersection with somebody that shows them care and attention. They change their way. Someone just shows them. So ultimately it comes back to me. The chaplains cared about the men, and there were discussions. Is there a God? I mean, this Padres are there'll always be a smart ass to say, well, there isn't a God, and the Padre would go, well, maybe you're right, but can you see it if you experience love? When you feel loved, do you feel good? Is that, could you not accept that as being God? You would have these discussions. It wouldn't necessarily change the person's mind.
No, of course. I mean, but the chaplains who.
But sometimes it's a childish view of religion.
Yeah, if they had gone through and dealt with the war and not succumbed to PTSD or drink or things like that, then the benefits of the tragedy of World War II is they had seen Catholics working alongside Protestants and Rangers fans alongside Celtic fans and this, that, and the other, all working together. And the number of veterans I've met who said they entered the military as a level of racism because they hadn't involved themselves, people from different colours, and then they all get thrust in together and they learn to accept each other and show, as you say, the love aspect and the care, and so out of that horror, they learn to be nice to each other, and so that when people say that the horror of World War II, I can definitely see from a theological point of view that in some ways that mankind was better out of it after it, because you learned a few things about ourselves, although 50 million being killed is a heavy price to pay.
Well, it is a heavy price. It's an awful price. Perhaps, and it's not, maybe it's cold comfort, is to say we haven't had a global conflict since 1945. You can argue. Indeed.
I mean, we've localized it.
Yes. But there's always been local things. It's just we know about them.
Yeah.
I was a Boy Scout and a Boy Scout leader for many, many years in Canada, and you Baden-Powell in South Africa. Well, it took a while for the cables to get back to the UK to say, oh, he's a hero, that he's holding out. They're holding out, and with these boys acting as runners and so on. That nowadays you'll have Fox News or CNN or BBC on the spot, uploaded to the satellites. We watch it as it happens. I mean,
live. Live. Yeah.
There's always been conflict. Humanity has always had conflict. One person wants to be better than the others. We think our way is better. I'm touching on modern situations, but Daesh or IS says we think this strict Muslim way is the way to go. The rest are all wrong. They're the Christian Crusades. We think our way is the best way to go. The others are all wrong. Kill them all. God will know His own, as happened here in France and in southwestern France. So humanity always wants to think they're better than others. Perhaps that's why communism really doesn't work, because we always want to better ourselves, and often one way of bettering ourselves, it's wrong, is to say they're less than us.
Yeah, I've got more than them. I'm better than them. Yeah.
And it's in ancient cultures. You look at the Indian subcontinent. They had castes, and some people are still today. They're only good for cleaning the sewers. They're still looked down, and yet that they don't do that anymore. And your caste is important, and that predates Christianity. Hinduism is much older than Christianity.
Indeed.
And Zoroastrianism. There's flashes of it in Scripture. You can see there's been influences.
Oh well, the big flood that was in whichever.
Yes, it shows up in a lot of oral traditions
and passed on down. So to sort of bring things to a close, otherwise we could just keep on going for forever and ever, which would be fun. We're probably as a species going to, in some ways, carry on having wars. Certainly, conflict is always going to be, I think, going to be with us. And at that time, we're always going to have the need for chaplains in the military. I imagine as well. There's always going to be a need to connect the ground. Here's what's going on. We're killing each other with this idea of a bigger picture, and the people to act as the conduit between what's going on there and what's going on up there. So they're going to be around, and whether we don't want to have conflicts, and but we're going to probably not avoid having them.
And the military, except for a relatively small number of Jewish chaplains, was all Christian. Modern military, you have Christian, Muslim, Jews. They all there are some. The very big armed forces might have the ability for Buddhists or Sikhs or Hindus.
Yeah,
they have the American Armed Forces has realized that a significant number of the younger soldiers are actually pagan. They have a faith, but it's in a pagan, and they've had to find ways to have an accreditation for pagan to be a chaplain, because they still have to be nominated by a body, whether it be the Methodist Church, the Episcopal, but they had to find a way to nominate a pagan chaplain.
And I guess just being spiritual as well.
Yes,
a lot of young people just consider themselves, they like a little bit of the Buddhist faith there, they have a little idea of that, and they don't consider themselves fitting into a particular religion or sect, but they don't think they're not. They're outside of that.
They take bits and pieces of world religions and do it. Yes. Because they've to our sorrow as adults in Christianity, they see us having church fights, and church fights are brutal. Within, whether it be denominational, within denominations, and they say, "Well, I want no part of that. You're not living up to what you talk. You're not walking the walk. You talk about love, and then you're saying, well, this person is not as good as this person." And they say, "I don't want anything to do with that." And so they say, "Well, there are other ways." And children are more educated in a lot of ways. They can read about other things now, and they say maybe Druidism works, or shamanism, or any of the others. And in fact, the Church of England is acknowledging this, because I'm just reading a book called The Shakin Path by an English vicar who is his diocesan advisor to other faiths. And he took a sabbatical and went out and talked to different people about Druidism and shamanism and animism and pantheism. And to say, yes, he chooses to be Christian, but these other things have things we might be able to learn from them.
Which is a good lesson for life generally, isn't it?
Yes.
In that we all have our labels of heterosexual, whatever it would be. But the more you understand of the fact that other people choose to live their life in a different way, who are we to judge their way of living?
Yes.
And it's quite to go back to what I said. It's quite okay to say I don't know, and I don't know about
and
this.
that's fine.
I'm going to stick with this and try and not be a dick. I think that's the simple thing. It's just don't be a dick, and don't be a dick to other people, and
that is very
covers
true.
it all,
yes.
really.
Yes, and that's ultimately treating others. They call it the golden rule. Treating others as you wish to be treated is a good way to live life. And,
absolutely.
And most world religions actually ultimately drill down to that.
It's the detail. The devil's in the detail.
And
pun intended, isn't it?
They get bastardized by people's own agendas. That they twist and turn the way things are written. And maybe as one last little parable I'll tell you about. In my first congregation in Canada, there was a neighboring church. And it was very, very conservative. And it was so conservative that they took this this church was very conservative, and they had an interpretation of Paul saying women should be silent in church that I thought was quite strange, because the women were quite supportive of this congregation, but women, they had a hymn sing to start the service, and so so-and-so would put up that, I want hymn number 103. I couldn't tell you what hymn book it is. Well, a woman couldn't do that. She had to nudge the man next to her. Hey, can you ask for hymn 103? Because she had to be silent in church. And yet she was there worshiping, that
Wow.
They can carry it to that extreme. What does that say? Well, it says only a man is important. If I tried to do that, my wife would kill me.
Yeah.
This is the reality that, but again, it makes the man feel I'm the most important. And again, women came from man. Well, no, they didn't. There's two stories of creation. Well, the first chapter of the Bible, I would say, says God created man and woman together, created humankind, if you want to use a modern term. It's only the second chapter that says, well, God created everything with pairs except for man, and man was kind of lonely, so he thought, well, I better take his rib and create a woman. The first two chapters are two different stories, and if you ignore the first one, then the second one makes women subservient because they came from man. The first one, though, says that God created both. So there's these things, you can find things in Scripture to justify just about anything you want. However, when you do that, you run the risk of someone finding the alternative to it. There's contradictions all the way through, and the people have to understand that. You should never use it as a weapon.
Indeed.
And chaplains didn't. They didn't use it as a weapon.
Which is, to connect it up and to finish up with history and the research you've done, and people like myself do, you find your accounts that says this, and this, and then you have to interpret those to make a version that you think is the right one. And you can twist it that way, and you can twist it that way, and was he killed by the SS? Was he murdered by the SS? Was he murdered gleefully by the SS? Was it an accident by the SS? Was he in the wrong place? Was he in the right place? And no matter how hard you try, as an individual, it will be filtered through the way your grey matter works it, and out the end will come. So something as... when we have so many different versions of even things that we documented in World War II, which was a very well-documented war with morning reports and after-action reports and eyewitness accounts and aerial photos and maps, and we still argue about the thing. So something as complicated as religions written 2,000 and more years ago and translated numerous times and filtered through this king and that body of that panel
and the story of only one people.
Saying, well, it absolutely only means that, and that is absolutely what it means. That's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, absolutely ridiculous. I'll do one little story as well. When I'm having arguments with people about my atheism and things like that, and one of the things a lot of atheists use, and please dive in, is they use the conflicting versions of the Gospels to prove that Jesus Christ's death and resurrection are wrong. I go, no, that's the theists have that one, because that, to me as a historian, if the Gospels were identical, you go, no, something's going fishing there, because you don't, when a policeman investigates a bank robbery, the last thing he wants to hear is 20 people who witnessed it giving exactly the same version. I think they've rehearsed this.
Yes.
So I think that's that's the believer's argument that they're different, because that's what you would expect from eyewitnesses. You would not expect them to remember the details correctly. So when atheists say, that proves it's wrong, I say, no, sorry lads, we can't have that one. That's their argument, because identical accounts would be suspicious. If they've been trained to say that. So it's interesting how, from a historian's point of view, how it teaches you to be open-minded with interpretation. And
when you go, one of the first things, the first year at seminary, they teach you take biblical classes, is what's called exegesis, which you look at the original language, Hebrew or Greek for the New Testament, Hebrew for the Old. What was the original intention of it, the author? What was the original writing? There's a big and a significant one, and maybe it's a good example of it in the New Testament, is it talks about Christ's brothers and sisters. Well, the Roman Catholic Church says he had no brothers and sisters. Mary was forever a virgin. Gospel, in my reading of it, says no, that she didn't have any sex with her husband till after Jesus was born. But you have this, but because, for example, the original language didn't have an understanding of the term cousin. A cousin would be your brother. So was it his cousin? That's what, to me, it makes no difference to his divinity.
No.
In fact, it makes it better because if you have siblings, you understand the human condition more. It doesn't bother me.
No, indeed.
It still doesn't make him not the son of God, but there are some that really, have a lot of trouble with that.
For example, in the Lakota tribes, there's about 10 different terms for brother and sister, because it's all extended family. Because the old adage of a child is not raised by a parent, is raised by the village. So and it changes what company you're in. Yeah. So you would refer to your brother when the elder is there. But when the elder's not there, you refer to a different term for brother because you're not being polite because the elder isn't there. And white people trying to get to grips with that was mind blowing.
We have trouble, and that's the same with Scripture. People that just read it, and I've had people say, "Well, it's written in the language Christ spoke," which was the King James English one, and I'm going, "No." Yeah. But that's 1,500 years after.
Probably a swarthy, dark-haired Mediterranean, not the Ewan McGregor image of so many English. Churches, blonde, blue-eyed,
tall, thin,
and even intonation. That even with a statement in a wartime document or in scripture of 12 words, where does the reader put the emphasis on what word does he put the emphasis to make which bit of it stand out? So not even just the way it's being read, at what speed, what rhythm, with a rising inflection, even that is open. So it's all open interpretation, and
that's what we have to be open to, is to if you narrow it down, and chaplains couldn't afford to narrow it down because they ministered to all sorts of people.
Yes,
and people that supported them, people that didn't like them. You heard me the other night, Chaplain Madanowski, who you mentioned is on the path towards sainthood.
Sainthood, indeed.
He would say, well, if you speak ill of the communion or the confession, okay, I don't hold a rank, so you're not striking an officer. Let's put on the gloves, and are you going to come into the boxing ring with me? You want to back it up. If you can beat me, I'll let you say it. But he had to stand up for what he believed, but he was also to say, okay, if you can beat me in this, I believe I'll win. So
it brings it back to the very first point about the tolerance, which another way you could say is inclusion, isn't it? Yes. The role of a chaplain in World War II is to, okay, I'm this team. Yeah. I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm a Protestant, but you're in my battalion, you're my flock, so. Yes. Let's ignore that, and inclusive, and you've got some different ideas, and you've grown up in this part, even different parts of the country. Canadian chaplain will be dealing with some French-speaking people, and people live on the coast, people live in the cities, and all that understanding, and what an amazing job they did. I guess even to your parish down in the south of France, people expats and people of different wealths, but so that would be your comparison to the wartime chaplains. But back in the day, my vicar when I was a kid growing up, everyone was from the same area. No one had moved in. There was no different colours there. There was all middle class Essex people. It wasn't much going on. But now you'd have to be dealing with a much more variety, as you said. The modern military dealing with the pagans and druids and spiritual people. And I think that's the theme I'd like to end on. Is just to keep on going outwards. Bring people in and be objective. Be self-critical. Examine interpretation and welcome and be tolerant, as opposed to you can't come in because you don't quite fit in this version because your version of this says that you can't do that and I can't. That's right. So, thank you very much for joining me, and we may or may do another one of these, another visit here, but we thank you very much for being my first interviewee.
Thank you.
And it was good fun.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.